Now, agriculture in many countries is one area where you cannot remove subsidies. I mean, and I'm sure that right now you're trying to make many farmers see agriculture as a business, not just for development of the rural areas. And I think that's the essence of this particular summit, to unlock, as it were, or open the eyes of people to the business potentials of agriculture. Now the question will be, what is the level of subsidies that your ministry is currently putting in, and how long will they stay in?
I'll tell you, all my professional career, even as a graduate student doing my PhD in the United States, I've always believed that the model that Africans were being given was the wrong model. Because if you look at United States farmers, American farmers are one of the most subsidized in the world. If you look at farmers in Europe, the Common Agricultural Policy of Europe, they spend well over $267 billion a year subsidizing their farmers. And think about it. You're actually subsidizing rich farmers. You're not subsidizing poor farmers. But when it comes to Africa, and when it comes to Nigeria, where we have a lot of poor smallholder farmers, some make the argument that we shouldn't subsidize them. Well, here's my own view. It's that if you can subsidize rich farmers, millionaires, and you cannot subsidize poor farmers, basically what you're telling me is to weaken my own producers so that your producers will be on steroids and they can produce a lot more food and dump it on my own market. No, that is economic slavery. I don't buy that kind of an argument. We must support our farmers. We must not abandon our farmers. We must create not only direct subsidies, by the way, but as Mr. President mentioned in his speech yesterday, supportive things around it, supportive institutions, be the extension institutions, infrastructure, storage facility, price stabilization, creating market opportunities for them. It's a whole slew of things we have.
So all of that will continue to be owned by governments. And for instance, if you're providing storage facilities, you're providing fertilizer, you're providing a host of things, to support them, is it going to be continuously run by government?
Well, let me tell you, it's not all run by government. But government cannot abandon farmers. Nobody does it in the world of agriculture. Nobody does it. So we are going to continue to support our farmers, to have access to quality inputs that they need, get access to affordable finance that they need. Take, for example, some of the things that we are doing with private sector. Let's look, for example, at the whole issue of financing agriculture. People will usually say, well, to finance agriculture, government is the only one that will throw money at it. No. Today we have commercial banks that are funding agriculture, financing agriculture. As I said, yesterday, we had 3.5 billion naira was what they lent to the growth enhancement scheme of government last year, and all we did. But this year, the banks have increased that, up the ante to, 25 billion naira. That's a huge shift. And these are banks lending their own money. I was in a conversation over dinner yesterday with one of the bank MDs, and this is Philip of UBA, and he showed me what the NPLs, non-performing loans were from all the money that they actually gave to agriculture. I think their total book value was about 41 billion naira. They lost about 24 million naira. So their non-performing loan was about 0.06%. And so you can see that agriculture pays, and the fact that we are fixing the sector well makes it a lot easier. Now, take, for example, the whole issue of silo capacity. Under President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, we finished our silo capacity. They were about 35% completion when I took over. We finished all of them. We have 1.3 million metric ton silo capacity today. But we are actually giving back those silos to the private sector, so that they can use it for warehouses, a system for commodity exchanges. You take, for example, extension. The extension system in this country collapsed since the 80s. And that was because, structural adjustment, the World Bank told us, collapse all your institutions around your farmers. So it was almost as if you took the Nigerian farmer, you put them in a rickety boat, you put them on the Atlantic Ocean, and you say, guys, swim, And so without those institutional support around farmers, they can't do anything. So what we're doing today is that for the first time, we've actually setting up a federal department of agricultural extension, straight line extension, from the federal down to the state level. But it will not just do public extension system, private extension system. Take the issue of soil testing, for example. We are working today with something called soil doctors. like the doctors used to walk around in those days with their little kits, around homes. Now we want our young agricultural graduates, many of them that have done extension, that have done agriculture and so on, they're going to have this kit. It's called Soil Doc Kit. It doesn't cost you more than $250. That kit allows you to go to a farmer's field and look at their soil and test it and pay for services. So
on the spot results?
On the spot, and you will get your result instead of waiting for maybe 3 weeks or even 3 months to get the result. So the technology has moved, and the way we're doing agriculture in Nigeria today, we are not going to be laggards. We are going to be front and center on cutting-edge technology.
Just the reason I raised the question about subsidies is, you were witness to the fraud that was in the fertilizer subsidy regime of the federal government, and you had to sanitize. One of the first things to do was sanitize a particular sector. And chances are that people are afraid that when you're gone, what's going to be happening to that particular sector, not just in terms of fertilizer, but how government subsidies are prone to fraud. A host of people benefiting that shouldn't, and at the end of the day, the farmer who truly needs the help doesn't get it. Yeah. Are you putting institutional mechanisms in place to ensure that these things continue to run in spite of who's there?
Exactly. First and foremost is that just think about what we did. You couldn't have done that without the president. We took a sector that was a murky sector. That was a very corrupt sector. People were selling sand to government as fertilizers.
Sand?
Yes. And people sometimes will never bring anything at all. And all the papers get signed from the down to the federal, and the fertilizer wasn't supplied. Or people would take fertilizer of the government, they would sell it off into Niger, to Mali, to Burkina Faso, or just unpack it and then rebag it and sell it back to government. Apart from the oil problems that we have, I think it was probably the most corrupt sector in this country. And so you found that the impact was bad on the environment. The impact was bad because poor farmers couldn't get fertilizers. Can you imagine smallholder farmers whose life and livelihoods depends on agriculture being given fertilizers in moodles, in bowls, like beggars? They have to queue, and somebody thinks they're doing them a favor. And so when we came on board, we said no. Because if you cannot get quality seed and fertilizers to your farmers, you might as well get out of agriculture, because it's like the critical production inputs we need. It took us 90 days with President's support to clean up the corruption of 40 years in this country. We took the government out completely. The government has no business buying and selling fertilizers. Why should they be? Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola is not sold by government. It's everywhere in the country. But when government starts doing that, it creates a rent-seeking system. You have people corner the fertilizer, the political elites corner the fertilizer. And we create massive poverty in our rural areas. And so we have cleaned that up. But the question is, how did we do it? We did it by simply opening up the black box, making it more transparent. We developed new technology to allow us to use mobile phones to reach our farmers. Because if you are in the business and you don't know the people you're trying to reach and you can't reach them directly, I think you're probably trying to steal or trying to do something bad. And so we reached our farmer, and it worked. Last year we reached 1.5 million farmers. Already, as I'm speaking to you, at this point in the season, we've already reached 3.5 million farmers. We're going to do 5 million farmers.
If you let me comment there,
But let me just finish that point. We're going to do 5 million farmers by the end of the season. And the other thing that we are doing, apart from institutionalizing that, is there was a public hearing on this at National Assembly. At the public hearing, you had seed companies, fertilizer companies, farmers, everybody from around the country. And that's the great job that the National Assembly does. And it was fantastic. The National Assembly members from all political parties, from all across the country, were saying the best thing that this government has done is to actually develop that electronic wallet to be able to reach farmers directly, that the farmers all across their constituencies are getting their fertilizers, to the extent that some of the legislators said, well, look, we have to institutionalize this, that no minister after you will be allowed to change this policy because it's working and the farmers love it. And so that is what the president was talking about yesterday in terms of institutionalizing our policy reforms. And I think it's a great success that other countries, many countries, are copying what we are doing here. Nigeria, we used to be known for fertilizer corruption, exporting transparency.
Before we lose out on this, you use the word in the season. So one wonders why it is only in this country you talk about seasonal crops or seasonal farming. So are you doing anything towards perennial farming system in the country, irrespective of season? You get to see a particular crop.
No, absolutely. You look at some of the other things that we're doing. Let's take, oil palm, for example. We used to be, the largest producer of palm oil in the world. Malaysia wasn't even there at the time. Indonesia wasn't there. We were the biggest player. But look at what changed. Malaysia was roughly about 150,000 metric tons. And Indonesia just about that in the 60s. We were over 500,000 metric tons during that time. Recently, Malaysia, as of last year, went to 20 million metric tons. We only went to 850,000 metric tons since that particular time. And so we decided that it doesn't make sense that Malaysia, which got its seedlings out of NIFO, which is based in Benin City, is now the global player, and we are importing ridiculously, crude palm oil from them. So we decided that we have to recapitalize our plantation. So, last year we started giving away 9 million sprouted nuts of high-yielding, palm oil palm seedlings to all the estates and farmers all across the country. So that's one thing that we are doing. Take cocoa, for example. We are going to be big in cocoa. I can lose to Ghana in soccer. It is Black Stars. But I cannot lose to Ghana and others when it comes to cocoa. We are the big player. And so we started by distributing to our farmers 3.5 million pods of high-yielding cocoa varieties. We are distributing to our farmers farm inputs for them to be able to produce. We want to increase our global production from 250,000 metric tons to 500,000 metric tons. So we're doing it also for perennials.
Pardon me.